My name is Maeve. I'm a transgender woman, and I'm here because I'm here to talk about my life as a trans person. It was a long process. So my journey into becoming a woman and realizing that I was trans was a very long process where for me, I wasn't that person that was born knowing, and often that script or that idea that people are born instantly knowing that they're trans isn't often the reality. So for me, I didn't have the language, I didn't really fully understand what these feelings were, and it wasn't until I was older and met people in the community that I actually really understood, oh, this depression I'm feeling is dysphoria. And this awkwardness I feel in my life that people perceive me a way that I don't understand why they don't like the way that I am, or I don't like the way they perceive me. Okay, I'm trans. It took me a while and a lot of therapy to get there, but somewhere around age 25, I basically had this epiphany while in grad school. And then I actually, in the middle of grad school, started transitioning. So, am I of sound mind? I would say I am of sound mind. I'm somebody who is educated. I'm somebody who has gone to therapy. I'm very aware of myself, and I think that in and of itself gives me a sense of sound mind. Now, does that mean that I don't suffer from anxiety and depression? I mean, that's not the case, and that doesn't make me less of a sound person, but I feel like what makes me sound is the fact that I have done a lot of work to educate myself and to make sure that I understand my feelings as much as possible. Because I knew going into this process that I was going to be relentlessly and aggressively questioned about my identity by people who didn't care to understand, you know? And even with the people who do understand and do care, they want to understand the nuance of it. So for me, I have to understand the language. I have to understand what exactly is going on. And it is difficult, but we talked about it's a learning process, and sometimes people don't know these things. Even as somebody in the community, I don't know everything, but I like to think that along this process, I've actually gained a much more sound mind because I've had to really discover who I am and what my wants and what my boundaries are. Besides being a woman, who am I? I'm an educator. I use that as a broad term because I've been a teacher, I've been a librarian, I work in a nonprofit as an outreach coordinator so that people are educated about LGBT issues. I'm somebody who is an artist, I'm somebody who's a musician, I do all kinds of things, I'm very active, and I like to do things besides I think people often think that being trans is everything. That's all my identity is. And it's a very frustrating thing because it makes it difficult when you're trying to talk to people and they're just they want to only know about that singular aspect of yourself. But it's I have so much depth and perception of my own sense of self that it's really there's a lot under there that I would love to unpack. And this transness is just, to me, yes, it's important, but it also is just who I am. It's not necessarily the most defining aspect of my life. My advice to anybody who has a partner who is transitioning, or maybe even a friend or a loved one or whatever, the number one thing I would say is be patient. Um, it's kind of a misnomer that everybody knows what's going on from the get-go. The way I perceived my identity from the beginning compared to now changed a lot. And that even sometimes people think oh, well, you're dealing with gender, and then what about sexuality? And it's there's these things that kind of twist and turn, and they ebb and they flow. And even people 10 years in their journey may have a revelation. It's not necessarily that it invalidates their identity. It's just that they have a much more secure understanding of what they want to be and who they really are. And so if anybody is going through this process and is kind of oh my God, what do I do? I would typically say, just listen, learn. It's going to be a little repetitive. You're going to hear some things. You're going to be well, don't say that. But it's well, sometimes they need to say it. Sometimes they need the space. So give them the space and just be someone who's along with the journey. And if you see you're worried about them, well, ask them how you can help. Go to places that like a Pride Center, or go somewhere to be educated, or take the time to read that book. There are resources out there. Honestly, libraries are a great place. That's where I spend a lot of my time learning about myself, to be honest. So I would say in this process of a loved one, someone in your family or a friend who is transitioning and you don't know what to do, the easiest thing I can say is listen and learn. My life before I transitioned, I would say, was shallow. And I know that's a very like sweeping term, but the reason why I say that is because I inhabited an identity that made other people comfortable. I inhabited an individual and I played a persona to me that felt like someone who was white bread, someone who basically could not be seen. I blended into society. I was an NPC, basically. I just didn't exist. And that was kind of the trajectory I was going, was to not exist, to not be remembered, to not be memorable, to not make an impact. I wanted to be somebody who could be forgotten, basically. And it took me a while to realize that living by other people's standards or trying to meet other people's expectations or trying to do things at the comfort and the benefit of other people is a shallow and empty, vacant way of living. And I didn't want to do that. Now, did that mean I wasn't like a person with thoughts and feelings? Of course, but it just meant that I had to do a lot of legwork on my own time to say your feelings actually matter. Like, it's okay that you are a person who wants to be heard. You are a person who has feelings that sometimes make people uncomfortable, and transitioning was one of those things. It was one of my deepest, darkest secrets. I didn't tell anybody, nobody, not even my girlfriend at that time was with me for 10 years. She had no idea. I kept it so close to my chest. I didn't want anybody to know. So I would say that I wouldn't say that I was a liar necessarily, but I was afraid. And I would say that was one of my biggest things, is the reason why I lived such a shallow life was because I was afraid to be the person who I wanted to be and the reality that would come from that. The response from my family was pretty much just disbelief, and understandably, right? My family's not queer. No one in my family was queer. Their only understanding of people who are trans is basically Chaz Bono, and even then, that was such an old reference that it's like there's a whole developing culture and understanding and linguistics that completely erupts into them. So when I first came at them and I said, hey, I'm trans. Well, I didn't actually have the opportunity to do that, unfortunately. I kind of lost that opportunity because I started hormones and then they noticed the changes and said, what's going on with you? So I had to come out to them. And that for me was really traumatic because I lost an opportunity to really work at my own timeline. And like I said earlier, giving space is really important. Letting people make those decisions and giving them the space to figure things out and come to you when they're ready is really important. And I think that was probably the difficult thing when I first came out to my family was I didn't have that space. It was, this is a problem, we need to fix it, this is a family issue, and it became so overwhelming and so difficult to deal with that I ended up not talking to them for almost 2 years. And at this moment, I'm just now reconnecting with them. And I'm seeing the change, and my partner's seeing the change, and it's a good thing. They're stubborn people, but at the same time, I'm seeing that the stubbornness is going away and it's being replaced with love and empathy. And that's the main reason why I'm coming back to them. What is gender fluidity, and is it fluid? I would say yeah. I would say it is. I think that people don't realize how much gender is fluid, even in cis hetero spaces, is that often, I think women, I'm a little biased because I am a woman, but I think that women really show this the best, that they can, it's really kind of like an energy, it's less of a defined structure and more of an energy and a persona in which you want to inhabit. And I think that I love this about being a woman, is that there are days where I can wear a beautiful dress and I feel very feminine and I wear the makeup and I have this great look. And then there's times where I put on the jean jacket, I have the jeans, and I'm wearing my tennis shoes or my Doc Martens. And it's it's just it's more masculine, but I'm still a woman in that aspect, and it's great because it's really just a form of expression more than anything. And it's really just the question with gender fluidity is, well, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? How do you want to express yourself? Like, the troubles of society right now is that we put artificial barriers to this, and we put like synthetic structure to what we're doing and to gender itself. But if you really topple all of that like preconceived symbolic complex, you end up getting into a much more beautiful range of expression that really is liberating more than anything. And to me, that's what gender fluidity is. It's liberation on its purest form. And I think that throughout history, especially in civil rights movements, people don't sometimes realize that that's what they're fighting for. When they fight for civil rights liberation, they're fighting for the people to be who they can and who they want to be in a society. And that's why I'm all for it. I'm all for gender fluidity. My favorite part about being able to present as a woman, I would say, is that I don't feel so, in a weird way, I feel stronger. I feel empowered. There are definitely days where fear is a reality, but fear is a reality in most people's lives. But I would say for me, it's this idea that I was holding myself back for a very long time. I felt like I couldn't breathe. There was no space for me to breathe. I felt suffocated and stuck. I felt like there was no way I could move, and that I was stuck, not necessarily in a box, but like in a coffin. And I was certain I was going to die in it. And I think now it's like I'm above on the surface, and I'm seeing a reality and I'm carving a space and carving a reality that feels more livable, And I think that like it's kind of crazy to say this, because I think like most people expect like this extravagant explanation, but it's like I just feel like I can be alive. And I think like it's like a basic need, but you'd be surprised how big of a deal that is, where I literally am like, yeah, I have like a reason to live. That's like a big deal, because most days pre-transition did not feel like that. My concern and fear around the current political climate, I would say what worries me is the historical trend. I studied history for years, and I worked as a librarian, and I would say that what was the most concerning thing to me was how much it was indicative and similar to past movements of hate, where it's ignorance and violence that is being perpetuated to satisfy a selfish need of an industry, it feels like. And I know that's a very vague but also specific statement, but what I mean by that is there are individuals who benefit from oppression. And what scares me the most is how the individuals with the most power are able to privilege the privilege or get more power from their power. And often individuals who are simply asking who are the most marginalized of the communities. And I understand that I have privilege simply by being a white woman. I completely understand that. But still being trans, I can say that it's unfortunate, because though they benefit from our suppression and them oppressing us, the reality is by us uplifting and empowering ourselves, they don't understand they're losing out on their own rights. It's a net benefit when people who live on the margins of society are able to have rights, because it means that regular people who maybe don't fit in those communities have access to those same rights and privileges. It's not that by me getting rights, you lose rights. The reality is if I gain rights, you gain rights. If I gain representation, you gain representation. If I have freedom, you have freedom. Freedom for some, but not for all, is not a free society. That's truly the definition of oppression. And so I'm just kind of worried about where things are going. I do think that it's getting tense. I do think that in my day-to-day life, I'm seeing it. The fear is really there. But at the same time, we're well organized. And I know that people want this oppression to keep going so that they can continue and benefit, and who cares about what happens as the aftermath. The reality is that I know hate's not going to win. I know at some point it's going to change, because if it really was something that was going to stick. I don't think that things would be where we are now. And seeing how every generation takes an issue and just changes the absolute foundation of reality. Yes, there's a pendulum that swings, but I truly think that though I'm afraid of the violence and I'm afraid of the ignorance, I'm also hopeful for the future that something actually good is going to come out of this in a weird way. What do I do for fun? Yeah. Honestly, I do so much. I'm very eclectic. So I don't publish anything. It's very much like stuff to do for me in my own personal satisfaction, but I really enjoy art. I enjoy comic books. I enjoy D&D and Dungeons and Dragons. I play a lot of Dungeons and Dragons. I listen to a lot of Dungeons and Dragons podcasts. I love that stuff so much. So, like, I'm all about like wizards and fairies and dragons. So I'm spending a lot of my time just like kind of drawing that. And then if I kind of get bored with that, then I go over and I have my music and I play guitar, and it's just, once again, I don't go on SoundCloud or anything. It's just a for me thing. And then I have like a laundry list of like physical activities I like to do. I love swimming. I'm always at the gym swimming. I love hiking. I'm constantly hiking. I was super into weightlifting for years. I had this like crazy routine where I became a long distance runner. And it was called the 3-3 rule, where it's like basically three hours of working out, 3 different workouts. And so each hour was a different workout. So I would do an hour of running with an hour of weightlifting, and then I would do an hour of swimming. And so I can't do that now, because I don't have that much time. But I try to fit in as much as I can to kind of keep myself satisfied. But I would say what I do now more than anything is I love food. I love food so much. I have food allergies, but it doesn't stop me from going out and trying to see the different things that are out there, because I feel like food is culture, and it's really great to even just get a little taste of what people's lives are like and what they have to offer, what story they want to tell through their food. How important has my partner and just having friends and support been to me? It's been vital. I mean, if I would have to say that the number one person in my life who has been the most supportive and learned the most has probably been my partner. I mean, she was there in the front lines of it. I mean, she was there to take me to my appointments. She was there to support me after my surgeries. I mean, she did so much. I mean, she's there to hear my insecurities, and she helps me through like the negative thought cycles and the downward spirals. I mean, what it does is that it keeps me level. I mean, it keeps my head above water more than anything. It makes me feel like, okay, if I have these people, I'm not alone. I don't have to be afraid. I don't have to give in to the bad thoughts. I don't have to hear all of this nasty noise about what it means to be trans and make it my reality. I can just say that that doesn't exist, that doesn't belong here. And what really matters is the love and the support that I actually have with the people around me and in my life. So really what the people have done and what the support has done, I mean, it's given me a foundation that I can build upon and really grow in any direction I want. I mean, my experience with the Pride Center in Stockton has been huge. I mean, the fact that for the longest time, I was the only trans person I knew in my life. And then I went there and I worked with an entirely trans staff. And it's wild because it's like, you understand what I'm going through. And it's like, there's like unspoken thoughts and words and things and ideas that are being said without even me having to say anything. We can just say one line, and then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, and that's hilarious. We can almost, and also too, it's like we go through so much trauma, and sometimes the easiest way to go through it is to joke about it. Like, man, I know this sucks, right? Well, ha ha ha. Let's make a meme about it. Let's go on Discord and make a bunch of memes about throwing bricks or about like, I don't know, just like something. It's sometimes you need hilarity in your life to handle through the craziness. And really that's what the sport has done. It's like, it's given me sanity, The traits that I noticed in my partner that made me realize that she wasn't scared of me or rejecting me really was the fact that she took the time to learn. And I'm going to be real. She's stubborn. She's a very tenacious individual, and I love her for that. I hate her for it, but I love her for it. You know? So I think for her, I just feel like what she did is that she kind of just took it head on. You know, at first I can tell there was like, this is frustrating. Like, we're going through a pandemic and like, this is like the worst possible time. But then at the same time, she always tells me that the one thing that made her stand by me the most about this is that she can tell the difference between how I was before and how I am now. And the one word I always hear her say is, you're actually happy now. I can actually tell you want to live. I can tell you actually care about your life. Like, you care about the way you look. You care about who you are. You care about the friends in your life. You care how people treat you. You are like in this like renaissance of your own making. And she's like, that's the number one thing. It's like, if I didn't really see that, then she would probably have a different story to tell. But because she saw that difference and really that defining aspect of happiness, that really, for her, that was the one thing that really made a difference and made a difference in her life with my transition. So for people who are feeling similar as I did or identifying with what I said and what I've been saying, I would say that like, you're not alone. And your definition of your gender and your gender identity, there's only one person who can define that, and that's you. And it's nuanced, and it's how you want it to be. And though I identify as a trans woman, I also identify as a non-binary person as well. And some days I feel more non-binary than I do as a trans woman. And it's really just finding out for you. Take the steps to learn, take the steps to find community, because community is out there, even in places like the Central Valley. It can be scary, but the reality is that we do exist. We're on college campuses, we're at high schools, we're in communities, we're in like midtowns, we're wherever you can find it. We're on the internet, we're on Discord channels. Really, it's just take the time to give yourself space and understand that there's no timeline to this as well. Like, that was something that was really scary for me when I first started, was that I was like, I'm 25 years old. I know, I see girls who are transitioning who were on puberty blockers and then they full-blown transition by the time they're 18. And it's like, I have so many years, I'm in a deficit. And that's not the case. The reality is that you got to the point that you are because right now you feel safe to explore yourself. And that's important. You were working on your own timeline and you were doing what you needed to do to feel safe. And now that you're willing to explore these ideas in a safe space, in a safe time, at the right moment of your life, take that time. Do what you need to, you know, and understand that if anybody's going to try to redefine this for you, understand that they can't do that. This is solely a journey for you. You're not alone in this journey, but you are really the one who's driving the car. It's up to you about where you go, what lanes you're going to take, what roads you're going to go down. And I think that's a very special thing. The number one misconception of trans people, as I see it, I would say, this is a very millennial response I'm going to give you right now. But it's like, there's a lot of like cringe compilations online or like social justice warrior, like kind of like this stereotype of what trans people are, which is like a overly emotional, misunderstood, and very kind of irrational person who really is just there to cause a fight. They don't understand the way that the world works, or basically like in media, we're either sexualized to a ridiculous degree, but we don't get rights. We are either men who dress up as women, or we are women who are tricking men, which I don't like that because it means that my identity is either defined by men or is to serve men, and I despise that to the utmost degree. I also feel like a stereotype with the trans community as well is that we're violent. You know, it's like this idea that we are this group of hellions that are going about in the streets and breaking buildings and destroying things, and like we have no rhyme or reason to what we're doing. And it's like, oftentimes these videos and mass media things or tabloids that kind of take our journey and our story out of our hands are often there to perpetuate a long-standing stereotype of our community. And that's the biggest issue. So if I had to really narrow it down in one sentence, what is my biggest gripe about how people react and see the trans community, is that often they're defining us without knowing us. And it's a tragedy, because often it's stereotypes and misunderstandings and pretty much someone who has never interacted with the trans community, who is making very wide sweeping statements and not understanding the nuance of this community and really the love that's at its core. Like, can we get angry? Yeah, but so does everybody. We're human. Like, don't fault us for being human. So there's often a stereotype that being exposed to trans people inherently spreads like a virus and makes other people trans. That's not the case. The reality is, and I don't have the statistics with me, I don't have the cited source with me, but I can just tell you from right now, this is anecdotal, but I can tell you from personal experience that if you know you're trans, or even in the trans umbrella, you'll know immediately if that's you. And it's okay if you realize it's not you. But some people sometimes just have to ask that question, you know, that burning feeling in the back of their brain of like, but what if, right? The reality is that exposure to me and exposure to people like me, it doesn't make your kid trans. It makes your kid more accepting. And it makes them more willing to be who they want to be. Often what I feel like people are afraid of isn't necessarily their kid becoming trans, it's their kid not being a monoculture, not being what is the defined route for individuals. So they're not afraid of their kid necessarily, because there are trans women who pass as straight hetero people. They're in hetero relationships and their partners sometimes don't even know. So that's not the aspect they're afraid of. They're afraid of their kid essentially being different. And that's not a fault of the kid. I'm going to be honest, that's the fault of the parent. If you truly loved your kid, difference is not a virus. Difference is not a problem. Difference is something to learn and to allow you to enjoy life in a unique way. So when people kind of put the blame on me and make me a scapegoat, there's an argument under that. If we look at it like an iceberg, you're kind of looking at the anger at the tip of it, but you have a whole other discussion that needs to be had about yourself and how you're thinking. So the question that sometimes I think people are curious about is often the irreversibility of being trans. I think that's often that it's the minute you do this, there's no going back. And I think it's kind of to address a stereotype. So if you were going to ask me a question, I would say that the reality is that being trans is actually something that there is a timeline to these things. It isn't permanent. It takes time for hormones to work, right? And it takes time for people to approve surgeries. It is a long and arduous process to get a doctor, a psychologist, and a separate medical practitioner to be able to approve for a surgery. It's annoying and it takes time. It took years of therapy for me in order to even have people acknowledge this identity. So I would say that for people who are worried about their kids getting on hormones or the doctors pushing these things, there is such a rigorous amount of means to prevent that from happening. And often individuals will know from the very beginning that this is something that I don't want to do, because they'll not like how the hormones treat them. And it takes months for the hormones to actually even be permanent. So I would say that often in this conversation of transness and what is often the worry, because they say oh no, a doctor is just going to let your kid go in and they're going to do something to their bodies. That's never the case. That would be so many levels of medical malpractice. But on top of that, the reality is that if you're worried about the results that transitioning will have, I think that kind of goes back to our previous discussion of, are you really afraid of that? And what is the real question? And often I feel like to solve that problem, you just need to be informed. Be there in the room with the doctor while they're explaining the hormone process, or be there in the room when someone is educated in trans medical care and ask them the questions so that you know the certainty. Don't let fear and propaganda be the main thing that drives your understanding. Because once again, there's a very diverse world out there. And if you really get to understand what's going on in reality, you'll often change your perspective of your own child and really help you grow to really understand them. And if they end up not being trans, that's totally fine. But just understand what your kid needed more than anything was for you to support them and help them through their journey, for whatever it may be.